The QUIMERA ANTS arc, the peak of none power ever seen in Hunter x Hunter, at least up to this point in the anime, of course. Up to now, the world of Hunter x Hunter can be divided into those who prefer a more modern and current style, like the 2011 version, and those who prefer the 1999 version's art style. Both are very good, but with some striking differences. We could say one is more melancholic, directly portraying a darker perspective, while the other is more focused on retention, perhaps making everything lighter. Which one do you prefer? Today, we're going to talk about these differences, take a trip back in time, and experience the QUIMERA ANTS arc together. Are you ready to dive into this journey? Then get ready, subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and activate the notification bell. Watching both versions is like watching two artists reinterpret the same work with completely different styles and tones. Each version offers a unique perspective, shaped by artistic direction, narrative choices, and the sensibilities of each era. The 1999 version dedicated itself more to exploring the emotional nuances of the characters, allowing the audience to connect with their pain and desires. Additionally, Leorio had a more cynical and human air, while Kurapika seemed more intensely consumed by his desire for revenge. The 2011 version took a different approach. Gon was portrayed more closely to the manga, with a greater focus on his almost unshakable determination and childlike curiosity. He still has emotional depth, but is presented with a more optimistic and energetic tone. Killua, though still complex, initially appears somewhat more accessible and less burdened, which highlights his evolution throughout the series. Leorio is shown in a lighter and more comedic way at the beginning, emphasizing his aspirational side, while Kurapika maintains his focus on the Kurta clan, but the intensity of his emotions is balanced in a more linear way. Visually, the art styles also reflect these changes. In 1999, the characters had more detailed features, with shadows and tones that emphasized their emotional expressions. Scenes often took longer to convey feelings of suspense or introspection. In 2011, the designs are more simplified, with brighter colors and smoother animations that capture the dynamism of battles and the lighter tone at the start of the series. This shift in character portrayal was also influenced by the way the target audience was approached. The 1999 version seemed more focused on an audience that appreciated a more mature and dramatic narrative, while the 2011 version aimed to reach a broader audience, including new viewers and manga fans who wanted a more faithful adaptation. The QUIMERA ANTS arc itself already has moments that cause a great impact on their own. If it had been adapted in that era, with the dark and introspective aesthetics of the 1999 version, one that emphasized dense and detailed atmospheres, focused on deeper emotions, and used visuals that conveyed the weight of the narrative, the result would have been striking. Mixing that style with the QUIMERA ANTS arc, which is already naturally intense and packed with philosophical and moral themes, would result in something even more visceral. It would feel like experiencing something so intensely that it goes beyond reason, fear, passion, or rage, almost like an emotional and psychological journey that transcends mere entertainment, transforming into the real feelings the author wanted to convey. The QUIMERA ANTS arc is, at its core, an exploration of moral complexity and human nature, both at its best and worst. With the dark and detailed visuals of the 1999 version, every aspect of the story would be amplified. The dense forests of NGL would be depicted with deep shadows, where darkness seems to swallow everything around, conveying a constant sense of danger and vulnerability. The villages attacked by the ants would be shown with an almost brutal realism, revealing the devastating impact the attacks had on the local population. Every abandoned house, every torn piece of clothing, every pool of blood would be treated with a visual attention that would make the viewer feel the despair and fragility of human life in the face of the ants' brutality. Even the QUIMERA ANTS designs would be much more intimidating. While the 2011 version presents clean and well-defined designs, the 1999 aesthetics would bring an almost grotesque touch to the creatures. The human ant hybrids would be more disturbing, with details that make them seem like abominations of nature, reinforcing the idea that they are a distorted mirror of humanity. The King Meruem, in particular, would have a design that reflects not just his imposing presence, but also the internal struggle between his monstrous nature and his search for meaning and understanding. His eyes could convey not just coldness and power, but also a latent melancholy, showing that behind his overwhelming strength, there is an existential void he is trying to fill. The main characters would also be deeply affected by this approach. Gon, instead of being portrayed as a boy with direct emotional outbursts, would have an arc marked by a slow and terrifying descent into his darker side. Every expression would be carefully drawn to show the gradual transition between his initial innocence and the blind hatred that consumes him in his confrontation with Neferpitou. The iconic scene of Gon's transformation into his adult form would be even more shocking, not just because of the physical brutality, but because of how the visuals would highlight his loss of humanity. His empty gaze, exaggerated muscles, and the shadows surrounding him. All of this would be a visual representation of Gon's inner destruction. Killua, on the other hand, would be depicted as someone constantly struggling against his own powerlessness to protect Gon. Their relationship would be even more emphasized, with moments of silence and glances that convey his growing concern. Killua's conflict between his loyalty to his friend and his fear of being unable to save him would gain even greater emotional weight in this version. His battle against his own family, especially against Illumi's orders, would have an aesthetic filled with tension and symbolism, with scenes that explore the literal and figurative darkness surrounding him. Kurapika and Leorio, although less present in this arc in the original version, could be used more actively in the 1999 adaptation. Kurapika, with his determination and personal tragedy, could offer an interesting parallel to Gon's fight. He could appear in flashbacks, symbolizing the weight of moral choices and the danger of being consumed by vengeance. Leorio, with his more human and empathetic side, would serve as an emotional anchor that contrasts with the increasing brutality and despair permeating the arc. Regarding the narrative, the slower and more contemplative pace of the 1999 version would allow for a more detailed exploration of the moral dilemmas presented. The conversations between Meruem and Komugi, already deeply philosophical in the 2011 version, could gain even more weight. The lighting in the room where they play Gungi could gradually change throughout the games, starting with deep shadows reflecting Meruem's emotional isolation and becoming clearer and softer as he connects with Komugi. Each match would be interspersed with flashbacks showing how Meruem was shaped by his creation and his position as king. The soundtrack would also play a crucial role. The 1999 version had more orchestral and melancholic music, emphasizing the creation of a continuous atmosphere of tension. This would be perfect for the QUIMERA ANTS arc, where sound could amplify the sense of despair and uncertainty. Moments of absolute silence, broken only by subtle sounds like the wind in the trees or the buzzing of the ants' wings, would be used to enhance immersion and emotional impact. The battles, although still intense, would focus more on emotional and psychological consequences. The fight between Netero and Meruem, for example, would be choreographed to emphasize not just the scale of power, but also the contrast between their beliefs and motivations. The moment when Netero activates the miniature rose would be even more agonizing, with a prolonged pause allowing the audience to feel the weight of the decision and its devastating repercussions. In the end, the QUIMERA ANTS arc adapted in the 1999 style would be a deeply emotional and visually impactful experience. It would further explore the duality of humanity, our capacity for destruction and compassion, for hatred and love. As the plot approaches its climax, the melancholy and weight of human choices become even more evident. The relationship between Meruem and Komugi, for instance, would be portrayed with a much greater focus on the subtle details of their gestures and glances. Komugi, depicted as a fragile figure with features emphasizing her vulnerability, would seem even more out of place in the chaotic world of the QUIMERA ANTS. Her interactions with Meruem would be charged with emotional tension, with the king oscillating between his violent nature and the discovery of something close to humanity within him. Prolonged scenes of silence, broken only by the sound of Gungi pieces being moved, would make the audience feel the weight of what is at stake. The fight between Netero and Meruem, another crucial point in the arc, would feel almost like a deadly ballet in this version. The visual direction would emphasize not just the action, but also the emotional and philosophical impact. Imagine a scene where, as Netero invokes his monumental attacks, the shadows of his movements create almost religious patterns around him, reinforcing the idea that he fights not just for survival, but for something greater. Meruem, on the other hand, would be presented as a relentless yet tragic figure, a being of absolute power, questioning the purpose of his existence. After the miniature rose explosion, the depiction of Meruem and his transformation would be even rawer and more emotional. The king, already weakened, would carry an expression that mixes pain, regret, and acceptance. The use of lighting and colors, typical of the 1999 version, would highlight the shadows around his body, while the radiation marks would manifest as glowing cracks, almost like a metaphor for his physical and emotional collapse. Komugi beside him would be represented in soft tones, almost like a beacon of hope amidst the darkness of the arc. Her decision to stay with Meruem until the end would carry an even more devastating weight, with the melancholic music reaching its peak as the final silence takes over. And the psychological impact on the surviving characters would be explored in greater depth. Gon, devastated by loss and guilt, would have visually intense moments of introspection. Imagine a scene where he walks alone through the devastated NGL forest, while flashbacks of his moments with Kite overlap with the destruction around him. Gon's guilt would be almost palpable, highlighted by deep shadows partially covering his face, as if he were constantly battling himself. Killua, on the other hand, would continue as the emotional anchor, but his pain and concern for Gon would be more explicit. He would be shown in scenes where he observes his friend from a distance, unable to help as Gon sinks deeper into his own darkness. Killua's struggle to protect Aluka while also trying to help Gon would be visually represented through contrasts. While he is surrounded by the soft glow of Aluka's aura, Gon is constantly enveloped in dense shadows. This would reinforce the weight of Killua's choice to prioritize his family, while trying to save the only true friendship he knows. Additionally, secondary characters like Nav and Morel would have much more prominence in scenes showing the psychological effects of the war against the Chimera ants. Nav, in particular, could be portrayed even more disturbingly, with his loss of sanity emphasized through close-ups of his terrified eyes and trembling hands, almost as if we were sharing in his paranoia. Morel, with his more stoic personality, would serve as a direct contrast, but even he would show signs of emotional exhaustion through small gestures and expressions. Finally, the arc's conclusion would not be a simple relief, but a devastating catharsis. The world itself would seem emptier after Meruem's fall, as if the battle had left scars not only on the characters, but on nature itself. The NGL forest, once vibrant and alive, would be depicted as a silent, almost desolate place, reflecting the loss of both the ants and the people they destroyed. This somber melancholic approach would be the final mark of the 1999 adaptation, leaving the viewer with a bittersweet feeling that, even in victory, the price paid was terribly high. This version of the Chimera Ants arc would be like a deep study of the darker side of humanity and the struggle for redemption amidst chaos. It's the kind of story that not only entertains, but leaves a lasting mark on those who watch it. What do you think of this darker and more psychological take? Comment below. Each version has its merits and unique appeals, and many fans enjoy watching both to appreciate the different interpretations of the same story.